Horror Story Animated, my favorite.
This happened to me when I was in 4th grade. I used to visit my grandma during my summer vacation. It was a fairly large house with 2 floors and multiple sheds here and there. In the back of the house, there were these woods near one of the sheds. As a kid, I used to travel through these woods from time to time as I liked staying there with the trees and the birds. I know it's weird, but I looked for fossils as well as hoping to find some
Bro, what are you, a paleontologist?
I know it's weird, but I looked for fossils as well as hoping to find some dinosaurs or something. One day I was digging, and I found a head of something that looked like a bull. I thought I found something like an old species of bison or something and rushed to my grandmother. I told her of my discovery, and she said it was just a bull that died years ago. I then asked why it was there, and she said people used to bury their dead animals there, and it acted like some sort of pet cemetery. I was kind of disappointed, but I still kept the skull because I found it to be really cool. My grandmother said to throw it away, but I hid it in the shed near those woods thinking it would be safe there. I then returned the next day hoping to find more skeletons, and I did. I found skulls of dogs, rats, and some unidentified.
You're digging for dead animals. There's only one type of people that we know would do.
I used to store them in the shed near the woods. One time, I went a little too deep in the woods looking for such finds. Moving past a fence I found, I began roaming and lost my way. I knew my grandma would be working at her farm and she wouldn't be home. I was so scared, and night was approaching. The only things I had with me was a hand shovel, a bag, and a small torch. I was moving as fast as I could, trying my best to find my house. As I was walking through the forest, I saw a shadow of something that looked like a deer with large antlers. But something was odd about it. It didn't seem to move even after seeing me. Usually, deer run away after they see someone, and I was surprised that it didn't. Suddenly, it turned to me with its glowing bright eyes. And then to my horror, I noticed it didn't have the body of a deer. It was something else entirely. It had the legs of what seemed like a dog with paws, and the body with human-like features. I couldn't see any fur. Instead, I saw skin. Rotting skin with dry blood and maggots. I slowly backed away from that thing, and to my surprise, it charged at me with a loud roar. I ran without any aim through the thick woods with that thing right behind me with its glowing eyes and disproportionate body. I ran through every thorny bush and climbed on every ledge until I saw the light of home. I opened the back door and stormed in, closing the door behind me. I peeked through a semi-visible window on the door to see that creature attempting to move up the stairs near the woods to my house. But it stopped midway, turning its bulky head here and there, and then left. I could see its front legs were bigger than its hind legs, like that of a gorilla. I ran to my grandma's room, and she asked me where I was all this time and that she was worried about me. I kept quiet, and I lied that I was just around the backyard.
Bro, tell her.
And she warned me not to go in the woods without her accompanying me. The very next day, I went to go check those skulls I had collected in the shed near the woods to throw them away, as I thought this creature had something to do with those bones, but they were already gone. I still wonder to this day what that creature was and what it wanted with me.
This next one's by the infamous Dr. No Sleep. Yo, I used to love these.
Dr. No Sleep.
Turn here, my brother said from the front seat.
Oh, slow down, man. Brother, don't get me salivate.
Where? Carmen asked. Right here? There was a narrow dirt track on the right, barely visible in the SUV's headlights. Yes, I said turn, goddammit! Marvin reached out and yanked the wheel to the right. Carmen yipped and slammed on the brakes. I reached out from my seat behind Carmen and grabbed hold of Jupiter to keep the big dog from jumping up front, as he often did when my brother and his girlfriend were fighting. But as soon as I touched the bull mastiff's collar, a rumbly growl emanated from deep in his chest. He looked at me, hanging jowls twitching in the beginnings of a snarl. I took my hand off Jupiter's collar, and the growling stopped. He was my brother's dog through and through. There was no doubt about that. Meanwhile, in the front seat, Carmen was pouting. This is why I hate driving when you're like this, she said. You always get so mean, and I hate driving at night. Well, excuse me, but I was shot in the leg, okay? Pardon me if I'm not Mr. Happy-Go-Lucky right.
Hold on, bro. You got shot and you out here doing this to your girl, man? Bro,
So if you don't mind, Your Highness, just drive where I tell you to drive. Carmen ducked her head and peered out the windshield into the dusty desert landscape.
If she wasn't driving,
the road
you'd
Marvin
be dead,
wanted
bro.
her to go down was barely a dirt track. It looked like it simply disappeared into the dark desert, and I could understand why Carmen was confused about going down there.
Yeah.
It seemed like it wouldn't lead to anything at all.
Wait, how do you find yourself here?
Are we sleeping in the car again tonight? Carmen finally asked, still not moving the vehicle. I could see my brother getting angry,
gosh.
his face going patchy with pink marks under his splash of freckles. I told you I have a plan! He exploded, reaching across,
Are you
gripping
serious?
Carmen by the neck and screaming into her ear. Now drive where I tell you to drive! Stop it!
Dr. No Sleep,
What is going on?
I shouted, lurching forward and grabbing Marvin's arm,
Back up.
trying to pry his hand off Carmen's neck. Jupiter started growling again, and I
me?
half expected the dog to attack me at any moment. But my sudden outburst surprised Marvin enough to divert his attention. He released Carmen and looked back at me, his face red with surprise and anger.
Attack me, I dare you. Let's
I
go.
let go of his arm and started to move back. But Marvin backhanded me across the face before I could get out of his reach.
Bro.
Get out, he said, pointing at my door. Come on, Marv, Carmen pleaded. He's just a kid. Jane, get the out of this car right now, Marvin said, ignoring his girlfriend. Jupiter stared at me, seeming to enjoy the turn of events. I grabbed my backpack, which contained all my worldly possessions, and got out of the SUV. A cool wind blew bits of desert sand across my feet. A moment later, the SUV moved off down the dirt track. I watched it go until it wasn't anything more than a set of red taillights in the distance. Shaking my head and fighting back a mix of anger, dejection, and sadness, I started off down the track, hoping it wouldn't be a long walk to wherever it was my brother was going. The SUV disappeared beyond a low hill, so I pulled my phone out and turned the flashlight on. My shoes crunched on the loose and gritty earth, which soon became the only sound other than the occasional breeze. A howl from the darkness to my right caused my spine to straighten. I stopped walking and pointed my flashlight that way, seeing nothing but little desert shrubs and cactus plants. It's just a coyote, I told myself, but it didn't sound like any coyote I'd ever heard before, and I'd heard plenty. Swallowing, I forced myself to keep walking, picking up the pace this time. Another howl came again, this time from closer. It was followed by a series of screaming yips
What the
that
freak?
seemed to come from all
Well,
around
turn
me.
around.
I hurried along, nearly jogging. Off to my right, a blur of movement
Oh my
streaked
God.
through the night just
Yo,
beyond the
he's
reach
dead.
of my flashlight. I only caught a glimpse of it, but the image that stuck in my mind was one of a coyote running on its hind legs. It was running fast. I broke into a full sprint, legs pumping and arms pistoning.
Hey.
Saw the vehicle some 50 yards away,
Oh, you see
headlights still on and illuminating a ramshackle one-story house. As I reached the SUV, I stopped and turned around, swallowing huge gulps of air. Sweeping my light around, I looked for any sign of whatever I'd seen, but saw nothing and heard nothing. I turned and looked into the SUV, seeing that only Carmen was inside,
Oh, I'm surprised she's
still
not dead.
sitting in the driver's seat. She looked over at me as I opened the front passenger door. Her pretty face was streaked with tears. I was just going to come get you.
Stop the cap.
Wiping her cheeks. There's something out there, was what I wanted to say. But it suddenly sounded so juvenile in my head.
Yeah.
Of course there wasn't anything out there.
No, there is.
Well,
no.
Maybe some coyotes, but certainly not any that ran on their hind legs. Are you okay? I asked, shrugging off the frightening encounter. You better go inside. You know how he doesn't like us talking to each other while he's not around. I nodded sadly, shut the door, and then walked up to the house. The
What?
front door was unlocked, and Marvin already had a camping lantern set up in the living room. The place was a dusty mess, but there was still furniture around, which was good. Marvin came limping into the living room from the hall, his right leg tied with a bandage just above the knee. Jupiter followed along behind him. My brother glared at me as he moved into the adjacent dining room
that was
and
his
pulled
brother?
a chair out from the table. setting his flashlight down as he sat in the chair. "Help me clean this."
What you mean help you clean this? You left me stranded.
He opened his bag to reveal the stacks of money he'd taken during the robbery.
Robbery?
I had to dig
Oh my
past it
gosh.
to find the kit. When I did, I brought it over to him. "Whose house is this?" I asked. "Doesn't matter," he said. "It's abandoned." "Why though? It looks like they just up and left one day." "The hell should I know? Indians are stupid and superstitious. Something about an evil spirit haunting the house. I don't know. It's all bull. I thought about my experience outside and suppressed a shiver.
Yeah, it's
"We're
not
still
no.
on Navajo land?" I asked. "What did I just say?" "Well,
Bro, if you
I know there's a
this dude
Hopi
back.
reservation too. Just shut up and help me clean the bullet wound." He took off the bandage and separated his ripped jeans so I could access the wound. I cleaned it and gave him a new bandage. Carmen walked inside as we were finishing up. She moved directly to the couch in the living room, dusted off the cushions, and sat down. I looked at Jupiter, who sat next to Marvin's chair, staring up at me accusingly. "How long are we going to stay here?" I asked. "Couple of days, until everything blows over." Another one of those strange howls sounded from outside.
So he just robbed
"What was that?"
somewhere.
I asked, pulse rising. "Just a coyote," Marvin said.
No, it's not.
But I could see the slightest hint of fear in his face as he said it, and I could tell he didn't believe the words himself. My eyes shot open, my heart feeling like I'd just been flat out sprinting again.
Wait.
But I hadn't been. I'd been asleep.
Oh, okay.
I was lying on the couch in my sleeping bag. The living room was completely dark, Marvin having taken the camping lantern into the bedroom with him and Carmen. Another thump sounded.
With one leg is
and I
crazy.
looked up at the ceiling.
No.
Something was on the roof.
No.
A scratching sound came again, followed by the thumping of heavy footsteps moving toward the back of the house. Suddenly, Jupiter started barking from the bedroom.
"Get it, dog!"
Marvin yelled. A moment later, I heard the bedroom door open. Jupiter came lumbering out, still barking as he headed for the front door.
"Jade, let Jupiter out!"
Marvin called. I
Why
didn't
don't you
say
do it?
anything. I just hunkered down into my sleeping bag and stared at the ceiling. The scratching and thumping had stopped, at least as far as I could tell. Jupiter's thundering barks were certainly loud enough to cover the sounds up.
"I know you can hear me!"
Marvin called. "There's something out there," I said.
"Yeah, no let him out and he'll chase it away. And let him back in when he comes back."
I heard the bedroom door slam shut. After getting out of my sleeping bag, I grabbed my phone and turned the light on. Jupiter was still going nuts,
Oh my gosh.
barking and scratching at the door. I went up to the window, which, like all the others,
Yo, chill out.
was covered in cardboard. It was one of the first things Marvin had commanded Carmen to do after she came in. I eased a corner of the duct tape and pulled the piece of cardboard box aside to peer out into the night.
Yo, chill out.
I saw nothing but the SUV and the dark desert. Swallowing, I stepped over and opened the door. Jupiter bolted straight out,
Oh my
his paws
gosh.
kicking up dust as he ran barking into the night.
Bro, he's
I shut
dead.
the door and locked it. When I was back in my sleeping bag, I stared at the ceiling and listened hard. Jupiter's barking faded as he got further away from the house, and I swear I heard the big dog yelp in pain just before the barking stopped altogether.
"Where's
What the
my
freak?
dog?"
Marvin slapped me awake. I opened my eyes to see him looming over me, face patchy with anger.
"I let him out like you said. I also told you to let him in. Why didn't you let him in?"
I looked over toward the front door, which was standing wide open,
He never came
allowing
back.
a column of bright sunlight entry into the otherwise dim house. "He didn't come back," I said. "I never heard him. Where is he?"
"I don't know.
Well,
Marvin
your
snapped.
fault, idiot.
That's the problem, you idiot."
"I would have heard him if he came back and scratched at the door. I would have heard him."
"Yeah?
Marvin asked.
Well, you didn't because he's not here.
Because he didn't
God
come back,
knows where he
dummy.
went. So you're going to have to go find him.
Bro,
Get
I'm taking the
your
SUV.
up.
I got
He
out of the
has
sleeping
one
bag
leg,
and
bro.
looked
Take his
outside,
money, his
seeing
girlfriend,
that the
and
SUV
bounce.
was gone.
Where'd Carmen go? To get groceries.
She's not coming
Now go
back.
find my dog, dipshit.
I pulled on my shoes, my stomach growling at the thought of food. Knowing there would be no arguing with Marvin, I trudged out into the desert, going the way I'd seen Jupiter go last night. Although it wasn't nearly as scary as it had been in the dark, I still felt a heaviness about the place. I felt like I was being watched, and by something or someone who didn't have any good intentions. After coming near the road we turned off of last night and seeing no sign of the dog, I wandered right toward a series of rocky bluffs in the distance. It took me over half an hour to reach them, calling for Jupiter every so often. I saw no sign of the dog, although I did see what looked like coyote footprints on the ground, large ones. I wondered if Jupiter had gotten himself killed by a pack of coyotes. Without thinking too much about it, I headed toward a small cave at the base of the rocky bluff. As I approached the cave, I heard a buzzing sound from nearby. After a few more steps, I saw a small cloud of flies around a dead animal.
That's him.
Approaching cautiously, I brought the animal into view, gagging as I saw that it had been completely skinned.
Yeah.
It was kind of hard to tell what it was without the fur, but by looking at the paws, I determined it was a dog about the size of Jupiter. There was a long and slow scratching noise from inside the nearby cave.
Don't you dare.
A sound like someone dragging a stick along a rocky wall. Backing away from both the cave and dead animal, I said, "Hello? Who's there?"
Bro,
Scratching stopped for a moment before starting up again. I turned around and ran, sprinting just as I had last night. And I didn't look back until I stopped because I was out of breath and had an ache in my side.
Are you serious?
Of course, there was nothing behind me but empty desert. Still, I hustled the rest of the way back to the secluded house. By the time I got there, I decided I wouldn't tell Marvin about the dead animal that may or may not have been Jupiter. I knew nothing good could come of it.
Yeah, that's true.
So I just told him I couldn't find the dog. By then, his mood had mellowed, and he just said that the dog would come back when he was ready.
No.
I didn't think Jupiter would ever be back, but I agreed with him. An hour later, Carmen arrived with the groceries. Mostly non-perishable stuff, but also a small cooler with ice and sandwich supplies. We all ate and then lounged inside the house, playing cards or napping as the day wasted away. Since there was no water in the house, we had to do our business outside. I made sure to go out to pee before it got completely dark, and decided if I needed to go during the night, I would just pee in a cup and toss it the next day. Going outside after dark was the thing I wanted to do least in the world. And I wasn't the only one. Both Carmen and Marvin got increasingly worried as the day dwindled and Jupiter didn't come back. Of course, Marvin wouldn't admit it, and he tried to cover up his fear with bluster and jokes. It didn't work. And when Jupiter finally did show up again, it was the beginning of the end. I just didn't know it at the time. Even if I had, I'm not sure I would have done anything differently. I heard Jupiter bark in the middle of the night.
Oh, for real?
The noise caused my skin to tighten and my throat to thicken. I didn't move from my spot on the couch. I simply stared through the darkness at the front door. A moment later, there was a scratch at the door, and then another, and another. Jupiter barked again.
Skinwalker,
I whispered. The bedroom door opened and heavy footsteps approached.
The hell are you doing?
Marvin shouted.
Don't you hear him?
I didn't answer. I just stared at the door as Marvin stepped to it. My whole body went stiff with fright. My brother opened the door,
Like that's
and
not him.
Jupiter trotted in like he'd just gone out to pee.
Good boy.
Marvin said, kneeling down to hug and pet the dog. I sat up and watched the dog follow Marvin down toward the bedroom.
they're dead.
Jupiter glanced back at me, his eyes flashing white for the briefest of moments. Then they were both gone, and I heard the bedroom door close.
Uh-oh.
I stayed where I was, unmoving, knowing I wasn't wrong about Jupiter. I'd seen his mutilated body out in the desert near the cave. I'd seen it. This was impossible. When 15 minutes passed and nothing happened, I laid back down on the couch and tried to go back to sleep. I wasn't able to sleep. Not while I was in the house with Jupiter. So I decided to go sleep in the SUV.
There we go.
As I was pulling my shoes on, I heard the bedroom door open softly.
Uh-oh.
Holding my breath, I stood up and looked at the dark rectangle of the hallway entrance, waiting for Jupiter to appear walking on his hind legs. When Cameron came sulking into the living room, I breathed a sigh of relief. Then I saw the look on her face. "What's wrong?" I asked. She shook her head. "That's not Jupiter."
Yeah, obviously.
Hearing her speak the words that had been rattling around in my head gave me a sickening jolt of terror. "I was going to sleep in the SUV," I said. Carmen just stared at me for a long moment.
Are you Carmen?
Then she said, "What about Marvin? I'm afraid something bad will happen to him." I stared down the hall,
Ricky's
not
toxic.
wanting to go anywhere near that dog. "Please, Jean," Carmen said.
No.
"Can you please try to get him?
Thanks, no.
Or try to get the dog out of here?" As much as I didn't want to go to the bedroom, I knew she was right. I didn't like the way my brother treated me or Carmen, but he was still my brother. I couldn't just leave him in there with that thing. I moved to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, then headed haltingly down the hall. The bedroom door was open, and I started to shake as I approached it. A sound like fast, heavy breathing emanated from the room. I stopped at the door and peered inside, chest contracting and heart spasming as I took in the scene. Jupiter loomed over my brother, who was lying on the bed. But it wasn't Jupiter.
Look at you.
Not really. His hind legs were longer and thicker than they should have been, and his front legs were extended into human-like hands with sharp claws. My brother's eyes were open and full of terror. He stared at me, but he didn't say anything and he didn't move. I quickly realized it was because he couldn't. Jupiter turned his head toward me, looking at me
Oh my
with a
goodness.
half-human, half-dog face.
Yeah, we're out.
His eyes darted from me to something against the wall just inside the bedroom. I looked down and saw that he was looking at the backpack with the money in it. And I suddenly understood. Jupiter, or whatever was posing as Jupiter, turned back to Marvin. The creature opened its jaws wide and lowered them toward my brother's head. Saliva dripped from sharp teeth, hitting Marvin's face.
Oh, man.
The only part of Marvin that moved were his eyes. They darted from me to the creature looming over him. But I knew there was nothing I could do.
Yeah, there isn't.
The creature closed its jaws on my brother's face, the teeth puncturing skin, and then cracking the facial bones underneath in a sickening symphony of horrible sounds.
My goodness.
I dropped the knife, reached inside the room, and grabbed the backpack. Then I turned and ran down the
Good
hall.
stuff, bro.
Do you have the keys?
I asked Carmen. She nodded.
Let's go. What about? He's dead.
I shouted, nearly crying now.
And Lily will be too if we don't go.
Carmen spared one last glance down the hall and
Bro,
then
leave.
followed me outside into the night. The next morning, I walked into a hospital on the other side of the Navajo reservation from where we'd been holed up. I found the Navajo man's room, the man Marvin had shot during the robbery.
Oh.
He was in stable condition, but unconscious as I stepped inside.
Yeah, give him his money back,
I looked
bro.
at his face for a long time, at his long black braids and his olive skin, and I wondered if he'd somehow sent that creature after my brother. I didn't know enough about what they called skinwalkers to understand how they operated or why they did certain things, but giving the money back to its rightful owner seemed like the only thing to do. It also seemed like the right thing to do. So I left the backpack on a chair next to the man's bed, and I walked out of the hospital, knowing I would never see my brother again, and hoping I would never see Jupiter again.
So that was 20 minutes long. Hey, it was long, but hey, it was juicy. If I'm being honest, I feel like he wanted his brothers to die. We're talking some. I stood there, but I couldn't do anything. He had a old knife in his hand. He's a real one, though. I don't care. But I love you. Peace.